I almost walked past it. It was the blue light that caught my attention. Not because it was particularly bright, but because it didn't seem to belong there. I'd walked that road home so many times that most nights I barely paid attention to where I was. The streets, the buildings, the storefronts, they'd all blended together into something familiar enough that my brain had stopped cataloging them a long time ago. I knew which sidewalks were cracked, which traffic lights took forever to change, and which alleys smelled like stale beer after it rained. I knew that part of the city the same way you know the layout of your own apartment. That's why the window bothered me. The night had been cool and comfortable. A light breeze drifted between the buildings, carrying the smell of damp concrete and old brick. Somewhere in the distance, tires hissed across wet pavement. A siren rose and fell several blocks away before disappearing again. None of it was loud enough to demand attention. It was just part of the city. I was halfway down the block when I noticed the pale blue glow near the sidewalk. I took another step before stopping. Then I turned around. The light was coming from a small window set into the ground between two recessed doorways. I stood there staring at it for a moment. The window itself wasn't remarkable. The glass was cloudy with age and framed by chipped white paint. It looked like something that had been there for decades, which was exactly the problem. I'd never seen it before, not once. I walked back toward it and crouched down. The glass felt cool beneath my hand as I leaned closer, trying to see through the haze. The first thing I noticed wasn't the light. It was the smell. Chlorine. Clean, sharp, unmistakable chlorine. My eyebrows lifted. Beyond the glass sat an enormous indoor swimming pool. For several seconds, I simply stared. Bright white tile covered the floor and walls. Long black lane markings disappeared beneath perfectly clear turquoise water. Overhead lights cast shimmering reflection across the ceiling. The entire room looked spotless, as though it had been cleaned only minutes earlier. It wasn't a hotel pool. It wasn't an apartment pool. It was huge. Olympic-sized, or close enough that I couldn't tell the difference. I found myself looking around the street again, trying to figure out how any of it made sense. The buildings above didn't seem large enough. Neither did the ones surrounding them. The pool felt too big for the space it should have occupied. Yet there it was. The water barely moved. Tiny ripples drifted lazily across the surface, sending shifting patterns of light gliding across the white-tiled walls. The room appeared completely empty. No swimmers, no staff, no lifeguard, no chairs, no equipment, nothing. Just the pool. "What the hell?" I muttered. The words sounded strangely loud in the quiet street. I stood and began looking around for some kind of sign. After a moment, I found one mounted beside a recessed doorway only a few yards away. It was small enough that I probably could have walked past it 100 times without noticing. Public pool open. 24 hours. No lifeguard on duty. I read it twice, then laughed, because it was absurd. Apparently there had been a public swimming pool beneath this street the entire time, and somehow I'd never noticed. The sign looked old and permanent, not something recently installed. I glanced back toward the window. The pool was still there. Curiosity got the better of me. The door was unlocked. When I pulled it open, a wave of warm air carrying the scent of chlorine drifted up from the stairwell below. For a moment I hesitated. The whole thing just felt strange. But curiosity is a difficult thing to walk away from once it's gotten hold of you. So I stepped inside. The city vanished behind me. The traffic sounds disappeared. The wind disappeared. Even the distant siren seemed to evaporate the moment the door closed. All that remained was a low, mechanical hum drifting up from somewhere below. A pump. I started down the stairs. White tile lined the walls. The lighting was bright but soft, free of the flickering fluorescent buzz I'd expected. My footsteps echoed gently as I descended, and with every step the smell of chlorine grew stronger. The staircase went down farther than I anticipated. Far enough that I found myself wondering just how deep beneath the street this place actually sat. Eventually, I reached the bottom. The pool spread out in front of me. I stopped walking. It had looked large through the window. From inside, it felt enormous. The ceiling hung high overhead, disappearing into a maze of white beams and suspended lights. Reflections from the water drifted constantly across every surface. The strangest thing was how empty it was. Not abandoned. Empty. Those were different things. Abandoned places usually left evidence behind. Broken furniture, dust, forgotten equipment, signs that people had once occupied the space. This room contained none of that. There were no lockers, no changing rooms, no office, no storage closets, nothing except the pool itself. It was as if someone had decided the only thing necessary was the water. I began walking slowly around the edge. The sound of my footsteps followed me through the room. Every movement seemed slightly louder than it should have been. Every scrape of rubber against tile returned a second later as a soft echo. The water was unbelievably clear. When I stopped near the deep end and looked down, I could see every detail on the bottom. The black lane markers, the drain covers, the individual tiles. The reflections fascinated me. They moved in slow, shifting patterns that never quite repeated themselves. I stood there watching them for a while. I don't know how long. Long enough to forget about the street outside. Long enough to stop thinking about how strange the pool was. Long enough that the steady hum of the pump faded into the background. Then I fell. There isn't a better way to describe it. One moment I was standing beside the pool. The next I was underwater. I didn't slip. I didn't trip. There wasn't even enough time for surprise. The world simply became water. Cold closed around me from every direction. My eyes flew open and all I saw was blue. For a split second, I had no idea which way was up. Then instinct took over. I kicked. My hand swept through the water. The surface rushed toward me. I broke through it with a gasp and immediately inhaled a mouthful of chlorinated water. The burning sensation hit my throat at once. Coughing, sputtering, half choking, I paddled toward the edge and grabbed hold of the tile. Jesus Christ. My voice came out rough and broken. I hauled myself onto the deck and stayed there on my hands and knees, while water streamed from my clothes and pooled beneath me. My heart was pounding. The chlorine stung my nose. Everything was soaked. What the hell? The words echoed through the room. Only the hum of the pump answered. Eventually, I pushed myself upright and wiped water from my eyes. Then I turned toward the staircase and stopped. At first, I thought I was looking in the wrong direction. The stairs should have been there. I knew exactly where they should have been. I'd walked down them only minutes earlier. Instead, there was a wall, a smooth expanse of white tile stretching from floor to ceiling. I stared at it. The longer I stared, the less sense it made. I walked toward it. The wall remained a wall. No doorway, no outline, no hidden seam, nothing. Just tile. I reached out and touched it. A knot formed in my stomach. I began circling the room, searching for another exit, another stairwell, anything that explained what I was seeing. There wasn't one. The room was exactly as empty as it had been before. The pool, the lights, the water, the hum of the pump, nothing else. By the time I stopped searching, my clothes were still dripping under the floor and my pulse was racing. That's when I finally noticed the hallway. I don't know how I'd missed it before. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't concealed behind anything. It was simply there. A tiled corridor extended away from the pool, disappearing around a bend somewhere in the distance. The lighting inside was dimmer than the room behind me, though still bright enough to see clearly. I stood there staring at it. The pool behind me was silent. The hallway ahead of me was silent. For the first time since stepping inside, a feeling settled into my chest that I couldn't quite explain. Not fear. Something closer to uncertainty. Because I honestly couldn't remember whether that hallway had been there when I arrived, and somehow that thought bothered me more than the missing stairs. I stood there staring at the hallway for a long time. At least it felt like a long time. Every few seconds, my eyes drifted back to the wall where the staircase should have been. Part of me kept expecting to see it again. The stairs, the doorway, some obvious thing I'd somehow overlooked in my panic. They never reappeared. The wall remained exactly what it had been from the moment I'd noticed it. White tile, clean grout, no seams, no outline of a hidden door, nothing. I tried to be rational about it. There had to be another exit. That thought helped. Not much. Just enough. I looked back at the hallway. The opening was wide enough that I couldn't understand how I had missed it before. It didn't look hidden. It didn't look secret. If anything, it looked completely ordinary, as though it had always been part of the room and I simply hadn't paid attention. After another glance at the wall, I finally started walking. The tile beneath my shoes was still wet from the pool. Each step produced a faint squeak that echoed softly down the corridor ahead of me. The hallway stretched forward beneath rows of fluorescent lights. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all covered in the same white tile. Everything looked clean. As I walked, the hum of the pump gradually faded behind me. Soon the only sound left was my own footsteps. I glanced over my shoulder. The pool room was still visible behind me. Blue water shimmered beneath the lights. Reflections drifted across the walls and ceiling. For some reason, seeing it made me feel a little better. Then I rounded a bend and it disappeared. The feeling went with it. I kept walking. The corridor never seemed to change. The same lights repeated overhead, the same white tile stretched in every direction, the same soft echo followed me. For a while I counted my steps. 100, 200, 300. Eventually I lost track and gave up. The hallway curved again, then again, never sharply, just enough to prevent me from seeing very far ahead. The air itself seemed warmer here. The longer I walked, the more uneasy I became. It was the growing realization that I should have found something by now. A door. A sign, another room, anything. Instead, there was only more hallway. I eventually stopped walking and listened. The silence settled around me immediately. No pump, no wind, no distant sounds, nothing. Then I heard a splash. I froze. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Water. Somewhere ahead, I stood perfectly still, listening. A few seconds passed, then another splash echoed through the corridor. My chest tightened. Hello? My voice traveled down the hallway and disappeared into the distance. No answer came back, only silence. I waited. The splashing never repeated. After a moment, I started walking again, this time a little faster. The sound of water meant another pool, maybe another room, maybe another exit. The possibility sent a small pulse of hope through me. I rounded the next bend expecting to see something. Instead, I found more hallway. I stopped, confused. The splash had sounded close enough that I should have seen something. Yet the corridor continued exactly as before. The same lights, the same tile, the same endless stretch disappearing around another bend. A nervous laugh escaped me. The sound echoed far longer than it should have. I didn't like that. I kept moving. The farther I walked, the harder it became to judge distance. Every section of hallway looked almost identical to the last. The lights repeated overhead in perfect intervals. The walls repeated. The floor repeated. After a while, I began feeling as though I wasn't actually traveling anywhere. As though I was somehow walking through the same section of corridor over and over again. I knew it was ridiculous, but the feeling refused to leave. Without realizing it, I'd begun walking faster. The hallway bent one final time, then suddenly opened. I stopped so abruptly my wet shoes squeaked against the tile. A pool stretched out before me. Relief hit me so quickly I actually laughed. For a second I genuinely believed I'd somehow circled back to where I'd started. The room looked almost identical. White tile, blue water, bright overhead lights, the same drifting reflections sliding across the walls and ceiling. I stood there breathing harder than I realized, trying to calm myself, trying to convince myself that finding another room was a good sign. If there was another pool, then there had to be other parts of the facility, other exits, other rooms, maybe even people. I slowly walked farther into the room. That's when I noticed the differences. The ceiling was lower, the pool was slightly narrower, the lane markings ended sooner. The deep end sat on the opposite side. It wasn't the same room. It was only similar enough to fool me at first glance. For some reason, that realization made me more uncomfortable than finding the room itself. I turned and looked back toward the hallway I'd emerged from. Then I noticed another opening across the pool. I frowned, and then looked again. There wasn't one hallway. There were two, one on either side of the room. Identical. Both disappearing into the same soft white light. I stood there staring at them. Until that moment, there had only been one direction to go. Forward. Now there was a choice. The thought unsettled me more than I could explain. I walked to the edge of the pool and looked down into the water. The surface remained perfectly still. My reflection stared back at me. Wet hair, soaked clothes, a face that looked far more worried than I wanted to admit. Seeing it made something sink in. The missing stairs, the endless hallway, the splashing water, the complete absence of another human being. For the first time, the reality of my situation settled heavily into my chest. I wasn't just alone in the room. I was alone in this place. I slowly lifted my eyes from the water and looked down one hallway, then the other. Both waited in silence. Both looked exactly the same. And for the first time since falling into the pool, I had absolutely no idea which direction to go. I stood there for a while staring at both hallways, hoping one of them would somehow feel different. They didn't. The openings were identical. The lighting was identical. Even the distance I could see down each corridor appeared exactly the same. Eventually, I chose the hallway on the left. Not because I had a reason. Just because standing there wasn't accomplishing anything. My footsteps echoed softly as I entered the corridor. At first, it looked much like the previous hallway. White tile stretched beneath rows of fluorescent lights. The corridor ran perfectly straight, disappearing far into the distance without a single bend or turn. The farther I looked, the farther it seemed to go. As I walked, I began noticing small openings set in the walls on either side. The first one caught my attention because I thought it might finally be a storage room. It wasn't. I stopped and looked inside. The room couldn't have been more than a few feet across, roughly the size of a walk-in closet. White tile covered every surface. The floor sat recessed below the hallway and contained perhaps a foot of perfectly still water. That was it. No pipes, no drain, no equipment, nothing. Just water. I stared at it for several seconds before continuing. A few moments later, I passed another, then another, then another. Each room was identical, the same dimensions, the same recessed floor, the same shallow water, the same complete lack of purpose. At first, they were merely strange. Then they started bothering me. Not because of what was inside them, because of what I couldn't see. The rooms ahead remained hidden until I was directly beside them. The hallway was perfectly straight, but the doorways were set back just enough that their interiors remained concealed until the last moment. Every time I approached one, I found myself staring at the darkness beyond the opening, wondering, expecting. The thought felt ridiculous, yet it refused to leave. What if one wasn't empty? I kept walking. My pace gradually increased. Soon I was speed walking down the center of the corridor, glancing into each room as I passed. Water, 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 water. The repetition became almost hypnotic. Then I noticed something ahead. The fluorescent light stopped. Not all at once, just ended. Far down the corridor, the bright white ceiling disappeared into darkness. I slowed immediately. The sight stopped me colder than I cared to admit. The hallway continued forward. The light simply didn't. For several moments I stood there staring. The darkness looked solid, like a wall stretched across the corridor. I swallowed, then kept moving. The last functioning lights cast enough illumination that I could still see ahead for a short distance. The next few side rooms came into view. Something about them felt different. I stepped closer to one. The water inside was no longer pale blue. It was black, not murky, not dirty, black. The surface reflected nothing. I couldn't see the bottom. The room wasn't large enough to contain deep water. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stepped into it, I'd never touch the floor. A chill crawled up my spine. I backed away and continued forward. The darkness grew closer. The final fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead. Then I stepped beyond it. Everything disappeared. The darkness swallowed the hallway instantly. I stopped. My heart hammered in my chest. There was no gradual adjustment, no dim shapes, no outlines, nothing. I couldn't even see my own hands. The only thing left was the corridor beneath my feet, and the sound, a distant mechanical hum. The pump. I heard it somewhere ahead. The sound was faint at first, but unmistakable. I stood there listening, then started walking again. The darkness pressed against me from every direction. I kept one hand stretched toward the wall beside me. The smooth tile slid beneath my fingertips. The pump grew louder, step by step, louder and louder. The sound became my only landmark, my only proof that the hallway continued somewhere ahead. I quickened my pace. The darkness remained absolute. My breathing became louder. The pump became louder. Soon, I was nearly jogging, then running,
The wall remained beneath my fingertips as I moved. Sometimes I lost contact with it and panic surged through me until I found it again. The pump roared somewhere ahead now. A deep mechanical growl vibrating through the darkness. Then I heard water. A violent splash erupted from one of the side rooms. I flinched. Another splash answered from somewhere farther ahead. Then another. Then another. Water crashing against tile. Water sloshing violently. The sounds erupted from both sides of the corridor. Closer, louder. Every dark room seemed alive with movement. I couldn't see any of it. Only hear it. The panic I'd been holding back finally broke loose. I ran. My shoes pounded against the tile. One hand slid along the wall while the other stretched uselessly into the darkness ahead. The pump roared. Water crashed. Splashes echoed from every direction. The sounds became so loud they seemed to fill the entire corridor. I couldn't see the lights behind me anymore. Couldn't see anything. Only darkness. Only noise. I ran faster. The darkness felt endless. The hallway felt endless. The sound seemed determined to drive me out of my mind. Then suddenly, impact. The world exploded in pain. Something solid slammed into my face. My head snapped backward and I crashed onto the floor. For several seconds I couldn't breathe. Stars burst behind my eyes. Pain radiated through my nose and forehead. I rolled onto my side, clutching my face. My fingers came away wet. Blood. A lot of blood. Damn it. The words echoed through the darkness. My head spun. My eyes watered. I forced myself upright and reached forward. A door. My stomach dropped. I had run straight into a door I never saw. The sounds were gone. Every one of them. The pump, the sloshing water, the crashing echoes, all of it. Silence surrounded me. I stood there swaying slightly, one hand pressed against my bleeding nose and the other resting on the door. The quiet felt almost as unsettling as the noise. I took a breath, then pushed it open. The room beyond the door was so bright that for several seconds I couldn't see anything at all. I stumbled forward with one hand over my eyes and the other pressed against my nose, still trying to slow the bleeding. The door swung shut behind me, and the darkness of the hallway vanished with a soft click. For a while, there was only white. White light. White tile. White pain blooming across the center of my face. I bent over with my hands on my knees and breathed through my mouth until the spinning in my head began to settle. Blood ran over my lips and down my chin. I wiped it with the back of my hand and stared at the red smear across my skin as if it belonged to someone else. The room was silent. Not completely. Nothing in that place was ever completely silent. Somewhere far away, a pump hummed. Water moved gently against tile. The air smelled of chlorine and warm plastic. When my vision finally adjusted, I lifted my head. The room around me was enormous. It stretched so far in every direction that I couldn't immediately understand its shape. There were pools everywhere, separated by wide paths of white tile that gleamed beneath rows of fluorescent lights. Some pools were narrow and rectangular. Others were rounded, shallow, or strangely shaped, curving around columns or disappearing beneath low ceilings. Reflections drifted across walls, so distant they seemed almost unreal. Near the center of the space stood 6 plastic water slides, arranged side by side above a large pool. Red, blue, yellow, green, purple, white. The colors were so bright they almost hurt to look at, after all the white tile and blue water. They looked cheerful in a way that felt completely out of place. Like something from a public aquatic center or an indoor water park that should have been full of shouting children, wet footprints, dropped towels, and parents calling from the edges. but there was no one. There were no towels, no chairs, no discarded goggles, no lifeguard station, no stairs. That last part took me a moment to notice. The slides emerged from the wall high above the pool, curved downward in long glossy lanes, and ended in 6 open mouths just above the water. There was no way to reach them. No platform, no ladder, no staircase, no walkway, nothing. They began too high up in the wall and dropped into the pool as though the rest of the structure had never been necessary. I walked around the pool slowly, staring up at them. The plastic was clean and shining. Water did not run down the slides, but the surface of each one glistened faintly, as though it had only just dried. I circled twice before I accepted that there was no entrance. The slides simply existed. By then, somehow, that felt almost normal. I kept walking. The rest of the room made even less sense the longer I looked at it. In some places, the ceiling rose so high that the lights above looked like small pale dots suspended in mist. White support columns stretched upward until they disappeared into brightness. In other places, the ceiling angled down until it met the floor, creating long triangular pockets of space where the tile folded into itself. I stopped beneath one of the highest sections and looked up until my neck began to ache. The ceiling was so far above me that it might as well have been sky. Somewhere up there, reflections moved across the tiles in slow, watery patterns, though I couldn't tell which pool they came from. That was when I finally admitted it. Not out loud. I didn't need to. I wasn't in a building anymore. I wasn't beneath the street. Whatever this place was, it was no longer pretending to fit inside the world I understood. I sat down beside one of the pools because my legs had started shaking. The tile was cool beneath me. My clothes were still damp. My nose throbbed with every heartbeat. For a while, I just watched the 6 slides. They sat there with their bright plastic mouths pointed toward the water, waiting for people who would never arrive. Eventually, I stood and kept moving. After that room, the pool room stopped unfolding in any way that felt logical.
I passed through spaces so large I couldn't see their far walls. I walked beside shallow pools that stretched into the distance for what felt like miles. Only an inch or two of water covering their tiled floors. I crossed rooms where dozens of small square pools sat in perfect rows, each one filled to a different height. I crawled through low openings half filled with water and came out into chambers with ceilings so low I had to move on my hands and knees. Some pools had no edges. They simply spread across the floor until the tile disappeared beneath still blue water. Others had edges too high to climb, so I had to walk around them for what felt like hours, following their smooth white walls until I found a break. The corridors between them became mazes. They curved when they should have gone straight. They doubled back without turning. Sometimes I could see the room I wanted to reach directly ahead of me, only to walk for what felt like forever, and find it no closer than before. Other times a doorway appeared beside me after I had been staring at it from a distance. Sound could not be trusted. I heard splashing in rooms that were empty. I heard pumps behind walls with no visible machinery. I heard water pouring somewhere close enough that I should have been standing in it. But when I turned a corner, there was only dry tile and fluorescent light. Sometimes my own footsteps came back to me from the wrong direction. Sometimes they came back too late. Time became useless. I don't know how long I wandered. Hours at first. Then what had to be days. Maybe longer. There was no day or night. No clocks, no change in the light. Nothing to measure anything by except exhaustion. And even that became unreliable. I never got hungry. That fact frightened me more than I wanted to admit. At first, I assumed fear had killed my appetite. Then more time passed and nothing changed. My stomach never cramped. It never growled. I never felt weak in the way I should have. Thirst never came either. I tried the pool water once, early on, when my panic was still organized enough to think in terms of survival. I cupped it in my hands and brought it to my mouth. The chlorine was so strong I spat it out immediately, coughing and wiping my tongue against my sleeve. After that, I never tried again. I didn't need to. That was the part I couldn't understand. I didn't need to. But I did get tired. That remained. My legs ached, my back stiffened, my eyes burned. Eventually, my body would grow heavy in that deep, undeniable way that leaves no room for argument. Sleep became the thing I feared most. Not the pools. Not the dark hallways. Sleep. Because there was nowhere safe to do it. There were no rooms with doors I could lock, no beds, no corners that didn't feel exposed, no place where I could convince myself I wouldn't wake up somewhere else. So I slept where I could. Inside the mouth of a dry slide, under the slope of a ceiling that angled low enough to make a little pocket of space, in narrow alcoves where the tile walls folded together. None of those places protected me. I knew that, but they made me feel less visible. That became enough. At some point, hope began to change shape. At first, I had hoped for an exit. Then I hoped for a sign, then for a door, then for anything that looked different. Eventually, I stopped hoping for things and simply walked toward whatever changed in front of me. That was how I found the room with the ceiling of water. I entered through a narrow corridor that opened without warning into a space so vast I couldn't see the end of it. At first, I thought the ceiling was missing, or that the room rose upward into darkness. But after a few steps, I stopped and realized what I was looking at. Water. Above me. Not reflected water. Not glass. Water. An ocean hung across the ceiling. It stretched from wall to wall, if there were walls at all. The room was so wide and long that the edges vanished into a soft white haze. Millions of gallons of water floated overhead without falling, clear and blue and impossibly still. I stood beneath it with my mouth open. The water was high above me, but not so high that I couldn't see into it. Light moved through its surface in slow ripples. Ripples crossed it lazily, bending the fluorescent glow into shifting patterns that flowed over the floor beneath my feet. For the first time in a long while, I forgot to be afraid. It was beautiful. That was the terrible thing. It was one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen. The floor below was dry tile. No pools, no drains, no furniture. Nothing except the endless room and the suspended water above it. Then I saw the door. It was far ahead. So far that at first I mistook it for a dark mark in the distance. A rectangle standing alone at the far end of the room. One door. Nothing else. I began walking toward it. The distance was difficult to judge. Sometimes the door seemed closer, sometimes farther away. It never changed shape, never grew much larger, and yet gradually, after what felt like a very long time, I knew I was approaching it. That was when the water above me moved. Not a ripple. A shift. Something passed through the sealing ocean from somewhere far away. A slow rolling motion that traveled across the water like a storm beginning beyond the horizon. I stopped. The movement faded. For a moment, everything was calm again. Then another swell rolled overhead. Larger this time. The light on the floor broke apart. A deep sound moved through the room. Not splashing. Not waves. Pressure.
A heavy groan that seemed to come from inside the walls, the floor, and my own chest at the same time. I looked toward the door, still far away. Then I looked up. The water was no longer still. Long waves began forming above me, rising and folding into one another without falling. The surface churned silently at first, then with a growing roar that seemed too large for the room to contain. I started walking faster. The door remained ahead. The waves became larger. The sound deepened. The seething ocean began to move violently now. Huge swells rolled overhead, mountains of water sliding across the impossible surface. The light shattered into frantic fragments. Reflections whipped across the tile in fast, chaotic flashes. My walk became a jog, then a run. The roar grew until it filled everything. Millions of gallons of water moved above me, and every instinct in my body understood what my mind refused to accept. It was going to fall. I ran harder. The door grew larger at last. The sound overhead became unbearable. It wasn't a wave anymore. It was the ocean itself changing its mind about the laws holding it in place. The floor trembled beneath my feet. The lights flickered in the water above, torn apart by currents that shouldn't have existed. I could feel it in my teeth, in my ribs, in the blood drying beneath my nose. The door was close. The ceiling came apart. I didn't see it fall. I felt the moment before it happened. A sudden absence. A silence inside the noise. Then I threw myself at the door, grabbed the handle, and stumbled through. I slammed it behind me The sound was beyond anything I can properly describe. It wasn't a crash. It wasn't thunder. It was as though an entire ocean had been dropped onto the world, and the world had survived only because it didn't know what else to do. The door shook beneath my hands. The walls vibrated. The floor bucked hard enough to knock me backward. I fell and scrambled away, pressing my hands over my ears as the impossible impact went on and on behind me. The noise filled my skull until I thought it might split open. Then, slowly, it faded. Not into dripping, not into rushing water, into silence. I stared at the bottom of the door. No water came through, not a drop. The tile around me was dry. The door stood there plain and ordinary, as if nothing had happened on the other side. I stayed on the floor for a long time. Eventually, I crawled forward and touched the bottom edge. Dry. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. I didn't open it again. I couldn't. I stood on shaking legs and turned away. Beyond the door was another corridor. Of course there was. White tile, fluorescent light, the smell of chlorine. I walked. I don't remember much after that. Not clearly. The rooms began to blur in a way that made individual memories difficult to separate. I remember crawling through a tunnel so low, my shoulders scraped the sides. I remember a pool shaped like a crescent that wrapped around a tiled column wider than a house. I remember a hallway where the floor was covered in warm water up to my ankles, and every step sent ripples running away from me faster than they should have. I remember sleeping, waking, walking, sleeping again. At some point, I stopped thinking in complete sentences. The pool rooms became everything. The white tile, the blue water, the hum, the light, the wet slap of my shoes, the echo of my breath. I don't know when despair finally stopped feeling like an emotion and became something closer to weather. It was just there, constant, surrounding me, pressing down without needing to move. Then I found the deep pool. It was in a quiet room. That was the first thing I noticed. No pump, no echoing splash, no distant water, just a room that seemed to absorb sound. The pool itself looked ordinary from the doorway.
rectangular, white tile, clear water, bright lights overhead. I almost walked past it. Then I saw the color. The water near the edge was pale blue, like every other pool. But a few feet out, the color deepened, then deepened again. The blue continued downward until it became something darker than shadow. I walked to the edge and looked in. There was no bottom. The water was clear. Perfectly clear. That was what made it so terrible. It wasn't murky. It wasn't dirty. Nothing hid the bottom from me. There simply was no bottom to see. The pool descended forever. I knelt at the edge and stared down into it for a long time. The tiled walls continued downward farther than they should have, fading slowly into blue distance. Then, into black. I leaned closer. The darkness below did not move. It did not threaten. It only waited. A thought came to me then, quietly, almost gently. What if I stopped? Not rested, not slept. Stopped. I sat beside the pool with my legs pulled close to my chest and stared into the endless water. I tried to picture the street outside, the sidewalk, the small cloudy window, the sign beside the door. The images came but weakly, like memories of a movie I'd seen too long ago. I tried to picture my apartment. For a second I could. Then the image slipped. I could remember the idea of it better than the place itself. Rooms, a door, a bed, things that belonged to a life that no longer felt connected to me. I didn't cry. I think I had already moved past crying. What I felt was worse. I felt tired. So tired that even fear seemed like work. The deep pool was the first thing in that place that made sense to me. Everything else only pretended to be endless. This was honest about it. I took off my shoes. I don't know why. Maybe some old instinct. Maybe some leftover respect for water. I placed them beside the pool, lined up neatly on the tile. Then I stepped in. The cold wrapped around my legs, my waist, my chest. I took one breath, then slipped beneath the surface. The water closed over my head with almost no sound. For a moment I floated. Then I let myself sink. I didn't kick, I didn't fight, I didn't try to rise. The light above me spread across the surface in a pale, trembling rectangle. As I sank, the room grew smaller, the ceiling blurred, the world above became distant and soft. The water was colder the deeper I went. My lungs began to ache. My body begged me to swim. I didn't. I kept sinking. The light shrank. My chest burned. The surface seemed impossibly far away now, a small, bright shape floating above me, like something from a dream. I watched it until I couldn't anymore. Then, there was nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on tile. For several seconds, I didn't understand that I was awake. I rolled onto my side and coughed once. No water came out. I wasn't choking. My clothes were dry. The room was silent. Slowly, I sat up. The deep pool was beside me. Perfectly still, perfectly clear, endless. My shoes sat near the edge, lined up neatly where I left them. I stared at them, then at the water, then at my hands, dry. I didn't scream. I didn't question it. Something inside me had no room left for questions. I simply sat beside the pool for a long time, looking down into the water that had refused to keep me. After that, I changed. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic way. But something had been taken from me. Or maybe something had finally worn out. I kept walking because there was nothing else to do. I slept when I had to. I woke and moved on. I passed pools with ceilings too low to stand beneath. Pools with water so shallow it only glossed the tile. Pools with no water at all. Rooms full of slides that led nowhere. Rooms where the floor sloped gently into water and never came back out.
corridors that narrowed until I had to turn sideways. Open spaces so large my footsteps returned as echoes from places I couldn't see. I no longer expected an exit. That expectation had become too heavy to carry. Then, after more wandering than I could measure, I found the island. The room wasn't especially large compared to some I had seen, but it stopped me immediately. A pool filled most of the space. Its water was calm and bright beneath the fluorescent lights. In the center sat a square island made of white tile. On that island was a small house. Not a real house. A child's playhouse. It stood in the middle of the tile island with a little door and a single window. Around it was a patch of bright green plastic turf, the cheap artificial kind used at miniature golf courses or playgrounds. Beside the house sat a single plastic beach ball. Red, yellow, blue, white. For a long time, I just stood at the edge of the pool and looked at it. The color green almost hurt. I had seen so much white, so much blue, so much light reflected on tile. That small patch of fake grass seemed impossible in a way the sealing ocean had not. It was ridiculous, cheap, artificial, meaningless, and it was the most beautiful thing I had seen in what felt like forever. I stepped into the water. Then I swam. The island waited in the center of the pool, perfectly still. My arms moved through the water slowly at first, then with more urgency. The beach ball remained beside the playhouse window like it had been placed there for me, though I knew better than to think that. When I reached the island, I pulled myself onto the tile and collapsed onto the plastic grass. The turf scratched against my skin. It was stiff and dry and unpleasant. I pressed my hands into it anyway. Then I lay down fully, cheek against the artificial blades, and a sound came out of me that I didn't recognize at first. Not a sob, not a laugh, something between them. My whole body shook. I lay there with my eyes closed, feeling the fake grass against my face, my arms, my chest. It smelled faintly of plastic and warm dust. Not chlorine, not tile, not water. Plastic. I laughed then. Quietly at first, then harder. The sound rolled across the room and came back strange and thin. I couldn't stop. I laughed until my throat hurt, until my eyes burned, until I had to roll onto my back and stare up at the ceiling while reflections moved across it like slow weather. Eventually, the laughter faded. I sat up. A little house waited beside me. Its door was small enough that I had to duck to enter. Inside was a single fluorescent light, a plastic table, one plastic chair, a plastic plant in the corner, and a plastic beach chair with a folded beach towel resting across it. That was all. No writing, no explanation, no sign, nothing that told me why it existed or who it was for. Just a small room on an island in the middle of a pool. I stood in the doorway for a moment, dripping onto the floor. Then I smiled. I don't think I meant to. The smile simply happened. The beach chair looked absurdly comfortable. The towel was dry. I stepped inside, unfolded it, and sat down. Then I leaned back. The plastic creaked beneath my weight. The fluorescent light hummed softly above me. Through the small window, I could see the pool surrounding the island. Beyond that, the white tile room stretched to its walls. The water remained still. I pulled the towel over myself. It smelled like nothing. That felt like a gift. For the first time since finding the window beneath the sidewalk, I didn't think about the stairs. I didn't think about the city. I didn't think about the door or the street or whether anyone outside had noticed I was gone. I listened to the soft hum of the light, the distant movement of water, the quiet. And for the first time in that place, I didn't feel the need to stand up and keep walking. The thought came gently. I could stay here. I only needed this. The island, the little house, the plastic grass, the chair, the towel, the pool around me like a moat. I closed my eyes. Somewhere far away, water echoed through the pool rooms. For a moment, I thought I could hear the city beyond it. Traffic, wind, a siren several blocks away. I smiled again, and this time I didn't try to stop it. I can stay here. This is my home. This is my home. I will stay here.